Masechet Yevamot Daf Kaf Dalid. We have two Mishnayot today on extremely important topics regarding which brother has the primary obligation to perform Yibum and who inherits, and the next Mishnah about converting for ulterior motives, which is very important and relevant. But we begin with the last line of the previous Mishnah, Kadmu v'kansu en motzi'in taneh shela afilu shenehem kohanim. We were talking about this case here, where there are two people married to two sisters, but they're not sure which one did kiddushin, but aren't sure who did kiddushin with whom, and they die without children. And in this case, the optimal solution is for one of the brothers, like Shimon, to perform chalitza and Aharon to perform chalitza here. And after they do that, then the other brother can actually marry the other one, whoever Shimon did chalitza with, Shimon Levi would marry the other, whoever Aharon did chalitza with, Elazar would marry the other, and this solves all problems. However, the very last clause says, let's say Levi and Shimon both perform chalitza, one to Rachel and one to Leah. All right, so now whichever one was married, which was engaged to Reuven, she is now a halusa. If these two then go ahead and perform yibum, both Aaron to Rachel and Elazar to Leah, then that we do not remove them from that marriage, even though they should also do chalitza first. But if they go to get married first, it's okay, because one of them is an actual Yevamah of Moshe, and the other one is not related to him, so it's perfectly fine. Okay, Shelah adds that even if these two are Kohanim, we still do not allow them, we still do not undo the marriages. And this is a challenge because one of these is for sure a halusa. Because Levi and Shimon did chalisa to both of them, and one is a chalutza. So therefore, one is chalusa, the one who was with Reuven. So therefore, a kohen cannot be with a chalusa. So how can you say that we allow both of them to remain married? That's the question. And the reason is because the prohibition of chalusa is only midrabanan. Because a kohen cannot marry a divorcee, that's in the Torah, but halusa doesn't say so explicitly. And since it's only D'Rabbanan, safek D'Rabbanan lekula, because we don't know which sister is in fact the halusa, the one that was originally had kiddushin with Reuven. And so each brother can say, no, it's not me. The other one can say, it's not me. And so safek D'Rabbanan lekel, and we allow them to remain married. And then we ask, is that true? The chalisa is on to the Rabbanan Hatanya, Gerusha, and Leela Gerusha, Chalusa Minaita Mulamad Ve'isha. We have a midrash halacha that on the pasuk, Isha zon machalo yikachu, Isha ve'isha Gerusha me'isha lo yikachu. This is the biblical prohibition of a kohen to be with a gerusha, and the midrash learns from the word ve'isha gerusha me'isha that there is yet another woman besides a gerusha, a ve'isha, and that comes to include a halusa. And generally, if you have a midrash halacha that learns something from a pasuk, then that is called a deoraita. And we answer, no, midrabanan hu asmachta ba'alma must be that in fact this law is only midrabanan because the chalusa seems like similar to a gerusha. And even though it's true, it brings a word in the pasuk, that's just a support to give the drabanan law an extra air of authority, because we connect it to a pasuk, and we can remember it better as well. Okay, this is an important methodology here, because probably if you just look at the Tanaitic source by itself, it was considered the oraita, but it's the Bavli now says, no, not true. It is a drabanan. All right, and now we get to the next Mishnah. Mitzvah bagadol liyavim bim kadam katan zacha. The primary mitzvah is to perform yibum is with the oldest of the brothers. However, if one of the younger brothers jumps in and performs yibum first, then zacha, it's the yibum does take effect. it is valid. All right, that's it. That's the short Mishnah. But it packs in a lot of information here that we have to analyze. Tenora banan. So we cite a baraita midrash halacha. V'haya habechor mikan shemisva bagadol leyavim. And the pasuk says the eldest. So we learn from the words v'haya bechor that in fact is the oldest that has the primary obligation. Asher teled perat la'ilonit she'en yoledet, who will give birth. So that we learn from there that only a woman who is fertile can do yibum with. But if she's ailonit, if she's not fertile, not fully, never developed biologically, then you do not perform yibum with her. Yakum al shem achiv lenachala, and we'll see who will be established in the name of the brother, and this means inheritance. Okay, inheritance. Wait, so someone will get the inheritance, but literally it just says Yakum al Shem will be called the name of. So who is this even going on? So is it talking about inheritance, or maybe it's talking about a name? And so if it's talking about a name, then that's surely talking about the child that will be born from the union of the Yibum. And in that case, so this is what we're thinking, if it's just talking about name, Yosef, Korinoto Yosef, the deceased brother's name was Yosef, then we'll call the child also Yosef, to uphold his name. Yochanan, Korinoto Yochanan. Ne'emar kan, Yakum al Shem achiv, v'ne'emar lalan al Shem achehem, yikareu benachalatam, Ma Shem ha'amor lehalan nachala, av Shem ha'amor kan lenachala. So I might have thought it's talking about the child, and I call him Yochanan, just like the father. No, but we actually going to make a gezerah shava here, and very important gezerah shava, because it says it will uphold the name of the dead, and at the end of Bereshit it says al Shem achehem, when Yaakov is blessing the two sons of Yosef, Menashe and Ephraim, he says they will be called the name of their brothers. Now they have names already. You're not calling them Reuven and Shimon, but rather it's clear from there that it's talking about inheritance. This is the way that Yaakov is giving Yosef a double portion by taking his two grandchildren and giving them the same status as his own children, and thereby counting Yosef as two for inheritance. So Shem here means inheritance. It's the legacy of a person that lives on through his land and possessions that go on to the next generation. And then maybe people will call it, oh, that's the field of so-and-so, right? But it is primarily inheritance, not the name of the individual. And so just like the word Shem over there means inheritance, so too Shem over here means inheritance. And this is a really solid and very important gezerah shava, because that is the peshat of what it means in Bereshit, and it may very well be the pshat of what it means here as well. Okay, good. So to understand this midrash, we have to go back to the pasuk for a minute and see what the peshat is, and then appreciate how the midrash got to this, because this is a case, as Gemara itself is going to say, where the midrash is not only added to the peshat, but actually uproots and goes against the simple reading. So the simple reading is that when one performs yibum, this bechor in the peshat is referring to the child that will be born, the oldest, the first child that will be born to the Yavam and Yevamah, the first child that she will give birth to. Yakum will be established upon the name of. Now here is a difficulty, because you would expect it to say Al Shem Aviv Hamet will establish the child will establish his father's name. So I have to say Achiv is not the pronoun of Achiv is not going on the previous immediately previous person, but rather on the Yavam beforehand, that it will be established the name of the deceased brother. So the child will be established, meaning inherit the name of the deceased brother, so that it will not be gone from Israel. And in fact, if you look at Rashbam, he says, Haben, Yakum Haben al Shem Achiv Lefi Peshat. He agrees that the Peshat is in fact that Haya Bechor is talking about the child. However, the Gemara just quoted midrash that we also found in the Sifrei that says Habechor is talking about the oldest brother, and that's really hard to read in. And so then, because it says Bechor Asher Teled, the Bechor that will be born. What do you mean? But this brother is already alive, right? They had Yibum only works if the brothers are alive at the same time, and that's why the Midrash has to reread Asher Teled to be a description of the Yevamah, that you only do it if she is if she can give birth, if she is not infertile. And then Yakum al Shem Achiv Hamet. So then it's that Bechor who in the Midrashic reading is the oldest brother that upholds the name of the dead, meaning that the oldest brother is the one that inherits, not the child. So this is a radical transformation of a reading of a pasuk. And in order to understand it, we can try to reconstruct what happened historically. Historically, we see examples in Tanakh of people that don't want to perform Yibum, like Aed and like Peloni Almoni. And so, if we ask, well, how come they didn't want to perform Yibum? The answer is because one possibility is because normally when a person takes a wife and child, he has to provide for his wife and provide for the child, pay food, clothing, shelter, tuition, but it's worth it financially because that child is also a person's retirement plan. When a person gets old, the child will go and work the field and provide for the father and be the future legacy who will live on and uphold the name through the field and possessions. So it makes financial sense, besides romantic sense, to have a wife and children. However, in the case of Yibum, one only has the obligations and none of the benefits, because now this brother has to take on his deceased brother's wife, take care of her, provide her food, shelter, and clothing, and then have a child, pay the child's tuition. And then that child grows up, and that child will then inherit the land that if there was no child would have been would have gone to the father or split up with the brothers. So now not only does the surviving brother not get the land from his deceased brother, that land goes to this child, and this child, even though it's biologically his, legally is not his, and that child will not be a retirement plan and will not uphold his name, but rather deceased name. So that's why Yibum is such an amazing chesed. So we can appreciate Boaz all the more that he did this. And anyone who performs Yibum, what a great kindness they are doing, self-sacrifice for their brother. However, because it was so difficult to do and so much of an obligation with no benefit back, so many people were not performing Yibum. And if they weren't performing Yibum, that means the widow had no one to take care of her and the deceased brother had no future. So in order to rectify the problem, this midrash does exactly that. And this midrash says that, you know what? You know who inherits? Not the child that will be born, but rather the brother who does Yibum. And that way now he has incentive. And so with the proceeds of this field, he can take care of the wife, he can take care of the child. And this way, at least the wife will have someone to take care of. She won't be left out on the street as a widow. And there will be a child to uphold the name, even though will not get the inheritance, but rather the brother will get the inheritance. So that seems to be the historical background behind this very radical rereading of the Peshat of the Pesukim. Okay, and so now we understand what the Bechor is, and this is the reason for the Mishnah, that the mitzvah is that the oldest brother should perform Yibum, and comes from here, HaBechor, and the inheritance. The word Shem is not the actual name, but rather the inheritance that goes to the brother. We continue reading and says, Velo yimachesh shemo, pirat sarish shemo machui, and so that his name will not be blotted out. And we say this comes to exclude someone who's a eunuch. If the deceased brother cannot have children, then it means his name is already blotted out even while he was alive. And so Yibum does not apply in that case. Okay, that is the end of the Midrash Halacha. And now, Amar Rava. אף אגב דבכל התורה כולה אין מקרא יוצא מידי פשוטו, הכה עתה גזרה שווה אפיקתה מפשטה לגמרי. So fantastic statement by Rava. Even though in the rest of the Torah, when we make a midrash, the midrash is an added layer, but the peshat still remains, right? And so there's two layers that we can read it. But here, no, it's the opposite. The gezerah shava can actually uproot this. In this case, it uproots the peshat completely, because if the peshat would be Shem means a name, and I would call the child the name. But in this case, no, it only means inheritance, and the inheritance only goes to the brother, and there's nothing to do with the name, and therefore there is no obligation at all to call the child that will be born any name, or the name of the deceased. You can call him any name that you want, and this halakha does not, the peshat does not apply at all. Okay. Shem mamash. Now hold on. We say, is there really a level of peshat here even? And if not for the gezerah shava, then I would have said name means an actual name. It's hard to read the pasuk if it's actually talking about what you're going to call the child because of the pronoun that I mentioned before, right? Who is the Torah talking to? Le'yavam yakum Hashem achicha miba'ele. If the command is to the yavam and says the habechor asher telet, child that will be born, should be established upon the name of, it should be your brother if it's talking to the brother. If it's talking to the betin, then you would have expected Yakom Hashem achi aviv mi ba'eleh. Then it should have said the child that will be born will be established upon the name of the child's father's brother. The deceased, because then the immediately preceding the pronoun should go on the immediately preceding noun, which was the child. So it doesn't work there either. It just says achicha. And so we answer, no, really at the Torah is directed. The Torah law is directed to the betin, and they're telling the betin, hey betin, go tell the yavam that he should establish the name based on his brother. And so that the pronoun, therefore, does make sense and can make sense, even if it's talking about an actual name. And so, yes, and so we uphold Rava's statement that in this case, the gezerah shava completely uproots the peshat. We could have read the peshat that's talking about the child and the child's name, that you call him Yosef. You could read it that way and parse the syntax just fine. And so this gezerah shava uproots it altogether. Okay, hashtad amar tekera bagadol ketiv ema bechor leyavim pashut lo leyavim. Okay, so now that we understand that hayab bechor is talking about the gadol, and the oldest brother is the one that does yibum. So what about the status of the younger brothers? We're going to go through a few different iterations, a few different possibilities. So the first one is that the Bechor does Yibum, and the rest of them, right, this regular brothers, and any brother who's not the Bechor cannot do Yibum, right? And so the obligation is not primarily, but only on the Bechor. No one else can do Yibum. But that can't be, because we already had a derasha that says Ki yeshivu achim yachtav, that Yibum only applies when the brothers are alive at the same time, and if they're non-contemporaneous brothers, then we don't do yibum. Well, if the mitzvah is only on the firstborn, then obviously the firstborn is alive at the time that the younger brother is deceased, and so there could never be a possibility of a case of non-contemporaneous brothers, and so you wouldn't need a pasuk to exclude it. So that's impossible to say that the younger brothers cannot do it at all. But we ask about that. No, maybe we still need this pasuk of to exclude a firstborn from a mother. If a man has two wives, and this one wife has a firstborn, and he has another well, it's not the father's firstborn, but it's firstborn of that mother. And so maybe I would think that's why if they're not contemporaneous, then they cannot do it. But otherwise, if they are contemporaneous, then either the bechod of the mother or the bechod of that mother can perform yibum. But no, we reject that. No, because the whole point of yibum is regarding inheritance. Inheritance all comes from the father. And therefore, the only relevant bechor is the father's firstborn. And it makes no difference if it is or not the mother's firstborn. Okay, so we resolved that one. But now another challenge. Ve'ema, ki ika bechor titkayem misvat yibum, ki leka bechor lo titkayem misvat yibum. Maybe when the Baraita says ve'ha bechor shetelet is referring to the firstborn, maybe that means that when there is a bechor, when there is a firstborn, then anyone can do a yibum. But if there is no firstborn, then no one can perform yibum. But it doesn't mean that only the firstborn can do it. But if there's no firstborn, if he's not alive, then no one can do it, right? So it's a possible reading. And so we say no. Amar kira umet ehad mehem mi la askinan demit bechor malachamana leyabem katan. And so no, it says the pasuk says one of the brothers dies. It doesn't specify which brother is the deceased. And so it could very well be that it's meaning that the oldest, the bechor, dies. And yet it says someone else is going to do yibum. So there would be a case where the bechor dies, there is no bechor, and yet a younger one can do yibum. And so this shows that even a younger brother can do yibum. But then we refute that. It says, well, not necessarily that the pasuk is talking about that. Maybe it says one of the brothers dies. Maybe it's only true if a younger brother dies. And then the bechor, the oldest, is the one that does the yibum. And so, right, this reading is possible. But no, we answer ha mi'et rachamana eshet achiv shelo haya be'olamo. No, because back to the problem we had before, that we have ki yashivu achim yachdav that teaches us that there is that we exclude any case where the brothers are not coexistent. So there has to be a possibility for the brothers to be non-coexistent. And a case of non-coexistent brothers can only be possible if a younger brother could, if they are contemporaneous, perform yibum. And so we reject that explanation of the Baraita. And so now we challenge with a third explanation of the Baraita. This whole time, what we're trying to figure out is, Pasuk says, Bechor, which sounds like there's something special about the Bechor, the firstborn, even though the Baraita itself that explains it says Hagadol, which just means the oldest, was not necessarily the Bechor. So we're trying again and again to say, how could it be possible? Maybe it's possible that is in fact the Bechor and not just the oldest. And so what are different permutations that there'll be something special about the Bechor? Like, why does the pasuk say Bechor and not just oldest? So the third possibility is Ve'ema kileka Bechor kadam katan zacha. Ve'ika Bechor kadam katan lo zacha. Maybe when there is a Bechor, then the Bechor has exclusive right to do yibum, and if the younger brother performs yibum, it does not work. But if the Bechor is not around, if the Bechor already died, cannot do it for whatever reason, then the younger can do it. So something special about the Bechor that's not true of any of the younger brothers. Amar kera ki yeshivu achim yachdav huksha yeshivat achim ze lazeh. But we reject this also because the pasuk says when the brothers are alive together, which means that they are all together. They are all the same. The word yachdav says that the law is compared one to another, and therefore all of the brothers are equally obligated in the mitzvah of yibum. Once we have this darasha, this by itself rejects all the previous possibilities that only the Bechor could do it, that only if the Bechor is alive, then the others can do it, but if he's not alive, only Bechor could do it when he is. If there is a Bechor, only he could do it. But if not, then the younger ones can do it. All these three possibilities are impossible because we've now established that there's an equal obligation on all of the brothers. Okay, so now what's special about the Bechor? Ve'ema ki'ika Bechor lihadar agadol, kileka Bechor en chozrin esel gadol. Okay, maybe it's as follows, that when there is a Bechor, then we go to the oldest brother, who is the Bechor. If there's no Bechor, then it doesn't matter the order that they're in. And we don't look for the oldest. But that can't be either. Lama tane abaye kashisha misva bagadol liyavim lo rasa olchim esel achiv hakatan lo rasa chozrin esel gadol. Abaye kashisha taught that the misva is for the oldest, and if he doesn't want to, then we go esel achiv hakatan. We go to the younger. And then if he still doesn't want to, then we go back to the older. And that implies that the eldest, even if he's not firstborn, has a greater mitzvah than the younger ones. So we try to explain that the pasuk says the word bechor because it's the bechor that has not only first dibs, but also if everyone else refuses, then we force the bechor, and that would not apply to any other brothers, only to bechor. But we reject that because Abba Kashisha says misvah bagadol, and that sounds like even if it's not the bechor, to the oldest who is available, who is around. He has first dibs, and he has the obligation to perform yibum, even if nobody else wants to. And so there's nothing special again about bechor. So back to our question: why does the pasuk say bechor specifically instead of just oldest? And we answer kib bechor, ma bechor bechorato garmalo af gadol gedulato garmalo. So rather we say the pasuk says bechor and anyone like a bechor. What's special about bechor? The fact that he's firstborn, that caused him to be the one that has the primary obligation because he's the oldest. And so anyone who's the oldest, even if he's not the bechor, it's being the oldest that will cause that person to have that brother to have the primary obligation. And so we understand why why we say the word bechor. Okay, a tangent. Let's say that the bechor, or the oldest, refuses, and then there's three other brothers. Does it go in age order, that the second oldest and then third oldest, or once the oldest refuses, then the order doesn't matter? So from the wording here, it says lo rasa olchim esel achiv hakatan. You go by the younger. It doesn't. Maybe it's referring to if there's only one younger child, but it doesn't say it doesn't say to the next oldest. Rashi says achiv hakatan means the next oldest, and yes, you'd have to go in age order. If we look at Rambam, however, here Rambam says macha shenistalek hagadol shemisva bo hare kulan shavin. This is once the oldest refuses. And he has the mitzvah, then the rest are all equal. All right, the rest of the brothers have no precedence one over the other. So Rambam may very well have our same girsa that says katan, and he interprets that to mean all ketanim, anyone who's younger than the oldest has equal possibility. And that in fact is the girsa in all printed editions and some other manuscripts as well. Ra'avad, however, takes up an opposite point of view, and he says, "Ech yomar, how could Rambam say that they're all the same?" Here I have in my Gemara, and it says, he quotes his version of the Gemara that says, "Misva bagadol yavim lo rasa holchin achad gadol." If the oldest doesn't want it, then we do it. Then we follow the gadol, meaning the next oldest, and so we do go in age order. And the Ra'avad's girsa does appear in one manuscript that's found in St. Petersburg. So they have gadol. If the gadol doesn't want it, then you go to the next gadol, and otherwise you go to the katan. So that sounds like it's talking about age order, or even this Geniza fragment in Pennsylvania says lo rasu holchin etzel gadol, and does say gadol doesn't say anything about katan in this case, but this might just be missing words. But all the other ones do say katan. This one, Oxford, says lo ratzu holchin etzel achiv, Lo ratzu olchin etzel gadol, and still has gadol. Okay, and so Rambam may have the word katan, and that's what accounts for his girsa, whereas Ra'avad has the word doesn't have katan, as you go to the next gadol, and that would account for his halacha. And so this is an interesting case where a manuscript difference can affect the halachic outcome, as the commentaries on Rambam already point out here. All right, so good. So this would be one reason why it says bechor, but we challenged it also. Ve'ema ki me'abem bechor lishkol nachala, ki me'abem pashut la lishkol nachala. Perhaps the pasuk is going out of its way to say bechor, that the bechor takes the inheritance when he does yibum, but if any of the other brothers does yibum, they can do yibum, but they won't get inheritance, and that can't be, because Amar Kara Yakum Hashem Achiv B'Harekam. No, the pasuk says anyone who upholds the name. If he did it, he upheld the name. That means he did yibum. Then he gets inheritance. So it comes automatically with the territory, literally. Ve'ela bechor dekarya rachamana lama lemay hilcheta. And so we finally ask, the fact that the Torah says bechor, what is it coming to teach us to say bechor and not gadol? Because you would have had equal information if you just said the oldest and not necessarily the firstborn. And the final answer is ligri ota. It's actually coming to limit the inheritance. Ma bechor eno notel beraui kib muchzak. Afhai eno notel beraui kib muchzak. That the way that they inherit are the same. When a bechor inherits a father, the bechor gets double only from what the father actually has in his possession, muchzak. But if something that's owed to the father and is only paid after the father dies, that the bechor does not get double of that. So if it's two brothers and the father dies having $3,000, so the older will get $2,000 and the younger will get $1,000. And if the father also happens to be owed $10,000 and is paid afterwards, then the brothers split that equally. So too the Yavam, who is getting his own share. Let's say the father was still alive, and so when the father dies, the Yavam would get his own share and get the deceased brother's share for whom he did yibum. And when he gets that share, he only gets the share of the deceased brother that was in possession, and not what was owed to him or his estate, and that was only paid afterwards. And that's why it says bechor, to tell us that the law of inheritance here is similar to the law of inheritance regarding a bechor. The next Mishnah has nothing to do with yibum, but rather suspected problems in a marriage. But it's included here because previously we were talking about distinguishing between cases where someone may not marry versus when, if they do marry, we force them to separate, or once they marry, we allow them to remain, which was the previous Mishnah before the one about Bechor. So we bring this case also where there is a similar distinction. Okay, the case is Hanit'an al hashivcha v'nishtachrera or al hagoya v'nitgayera. Hareze lo yichnos. If someone is suspected, there's a rumor. It's not proven, it's not a substantiated rumor, but it's a reliable enough rumor that a person was intimate with a maidservant, meaning Eved Shivcha Kena'anit, who's not Jewish. And then that woman is freed, and by becoming freed, she becomes a convert. She becomes a full Jew. Or if he was suspected, there was a rumor that he was together with a non-Jew, and then that non-Jew converted. That man may not marry either the shivcha or the woman who converted, even though at this point, this person, they are fully Jewish and they could marry anybody else. But because there was a rumor about this person while they were not Jewish, so this person should not benefit from having sinned. And if he goes ahead and marries this person, it will only confirm the rumor that was around before. And everybody say, oh, see, it's true. She only converted to be with him. And it's true that he was together with her in sin. We also mentioned this prohibition earlier in the Mishnah regarding a shivcha or a goya. That's okay. That's case one. Im kanas and mosin biyado. Nevertheless, since this is only a problem about confirming a rumor, but the marriage, if he does marry her, is valid because she is Jewish. So therefore, bidi avad. If he goes ahead and does kiddushin, he gets two witnesses and finds someone who's willing to be a witness and do it. Then we do not force him to divorce her. Next case. Hanit'an al eshet ish ve'hosiuha mitachat yado af al pi shekanas yosi. This case is more stringent. Someone about whom there is a rumor that he committed adultery. In that case, she committed adultery, and then we force that couple to divorce as she's removed from her husband. And so then the adulterer and this woman may not get married, right? So again, someone should not benefit from after having sinned. This would be a deterrent for having adultery, in that if the adulterer and this married woman are together, then while they're married, then they will never be able to be married legally. So they should go through a proper divorce first before they are together. And in this case, because it is more stringent, a violation of adultery, even if they go ahead and do get married, and while the marriage does take effect, the court will force them to divorce because of that sin. All right, that is the Mishnah's two cases. Now, Giyoret miha havya. Now we ask a question on the first case. This woman who was not Jewish, and she was with a Jewish man, or suspected of being with a Jewish man, and then converts, and we do not allow them to marry. Okay, we don't allow them to marry, but the implication is that the conversion is a valid conversion, and she could go ahead and marry someone else, and would continue her life as a Jew. Urminhi, and now we have a baraita, a very important baraita that contradicts this. We have a baraita that says a man or a woman who converted for marriage, right? A man converted to marry a woman, or a woman converted to be with a Jewish man. Or someone converted because they want to be at the king's table. Not literally, it means that there's prestige when the Jewish people are doing well and their economy is doing well. You can say, like today, when where immigrants from Philippines and lots of different countries would love to convert to Judaism so that they could make aliyah under the law of return, because the economy in Israel is doing very well, and they get health care and everything. So they are converting for ulterior motives. Leshum avdeh Shlomo enam gedim, if they want to convert to be one of King Shlomo's servants and have power, all these people are not gedim, all right? Even if they go through the process, we do not accept it. דברי רבי נחמיה, שהיה רבי נחמיה אומר, אחד גרי עריות, ואחד גרי חלומות, ואחד גרי מרדכי ואסתר, אינם גרים עד שיתגיירו בזמן הזה. Because Rabbi Nehemiah furthermore said that someone who converts because they are scared of lions, as happened to the Samaritans, those the people in the north of Israel, after the 10 tribes were exiled, and these were people that came from other countries, and lions came to attack them, and they realized it's because they are not following the laws of the God of the land, and so then they started following the Torah because they were scared. So they did undergo a conversion. So Rabbi Nehemiah says these converts, who now later became known as the Samaritans, and also someone who converts because he saw some kind of dream that said he should convert, or if they converted during the time of Mordechai and Esther. At the end of the Megillah says that many of the people of the land, mityahadim, which the Septuagint translates, in fact, not as they were supporting the Jews, but that they actually converted to Judaism because of the fear of the Jews was upon them. All these people are converting also for ulterior motives out of fear. And we do not accept them unless they convert at this time. okay, we just clarified this point. What do you mean convert at this time? They lived hundreds of years before. How are they going to convert at this time? Only at this time, whenever Rabbi Nehemiah was writing, one can accept converts. What we mean is that any time like now, when Rabbi Nehemiah was around, then the Romans were in charge, the Jews were being persecuted, and there was no personal benefit or economic benefit in becoming Jewish. Then, if someone is still willing to sacrifice all that and become Jewish, then we accept it because then we know it is sincere. Okay, so that is Rabbi Nehemiah. And see, according to that, a conversion for ulterior motive is invalid. Whereas from the Mishnah, we inferred that although she cannot marry the person, the Jew that she was with when she was not Jewish, nevertheless, the conversion is valid. So how do we square this away? Kulam gerim hem, and we answer no. The Rav already said that the halacha follows the other opinion, not Rabbi Nehemiah. There is another opinion that is more lenient and says all of these cases are in fact valid converts. Right? It doesn't mean that one has to convert them or should convert them if they have ulterior motives. But if for whatever reason they were accepted and they did go through a conversion process, then that conversion is valid, even though it's for marriage or for fear or for economic benefit. Is valid. Okay, now we ask, if so, if you're saying they're valid, then why don't we say that lechatechila, we would permit this person who was not Jewish and converted to be with her suspected consort and allow them to get married lechatechila. Mishum de Rab Aseh damar Rav Aseh haser mimecha kshut peh ulzut sefatayim. Pasuk in Mishleh says, remove from yourself a twisted mouth, perverse lips. In other words, if we allow lichatechila, this Jewish man, to go ahead and marry the convert with whom he was suspected of being before she converted, then people will say, "Oh, see, that rumor was true all along, and look at a terrible thing that is." And the person should keep away, and even the possibility of confirming bad rumors, especially if it's true. And so therefore, we say, lechatechila, do not marry this woman and don't confirm this lashon hara that people are saying. Okay, teno rabbanan. And mekablin gerin limotam mashiach. Now, more on the theme of conversion for ulterior motive, says this Baraita says we do not accept converts in the time of Mashiach because then everything's going to be great for Israel and everyone's going to want to convert just because it's better. Similarly, at the time of David and Shlomo, converts were not accepted because they were ascendant and rich and everything, and people would want to convert just for the economic benefit and not because they truly loved Torah. Amar Rabbi Eliezer or El-Azar. Maikera, how do we know? What's the source? So it's from Pasuk in Yeshaya. It says, Hen gor yagur efes me'oti, mi gar itach alayich yipol, aval idach la. So we're understanding this word, gor yagur, which maybe in Peshat might means something about terror, like my God misavi. But here they're interpreting it as convert. So if someone converts, it should be at a time of efes me'oti, when Hashem says, when I am not around, right? When Hashem is nistar and is not with the Jews, not helping out the Jewish people, and they're low down and persecuted. That is when you can accept a convert, right? Migad itach, whoever converts with you when you are alone, and then that person will be with you and they will be considered a valid convert going forward, but not otherwise. At a time when Hashem's glory is with the people and the people have a time of Mashiach and prosperity, then we cannot accept converts. So you see this follows the opinion of Rabbi Nehemiah above. Okay, and now we get to the next, the second case in the Mishnah. Hanit'an al eshet ish, someone who's suspected of adultery. then even if she does get divorced, she cannot marry the adulterer. Amar Rav Ube Rav says that this is only in a case where there were witnesses to the infidelity. And then the court says, oh, there's witnesses, and therefore you must divorce your husband. In that case, it's substantiated. It's not just a rumor. And then this is a fine that you can't go ahead and be with the adulterer who caused the breakup of the first marriage. But according to Rav, if it's only a rumor, then they would be able to remain married. Okay, so Rav is a significant limitation that is a leniency. Amar Rav Sheshat, Amina kinayim b'shachev Rav, Amar lahai shematata. Okay, now amazing statement. Rav Sheshat says, Rav must have said this while he was sleeping or dozing, because it's something wrong with it, right? He must not have realized what he said, because this contradicts the following baraita. Detanya, hanit'an al eshet ish vosiuha al yado, v'nitkaresha mitachat yedei acher, im kanas lo yosi. The following baraita introduces another variation of the case where there's a second man in between. So a person is suspected, a woman is suspected of eshet, a man is suspected of eshet ish, of taking another man's wife, and then the court jumped in, stepped in, and caused and forced her to be divorced from her first husband, and she did. She was divorced, and then she married a different guy who was not involved in not the first husband and not the adulterer, right? Someone else that was not involved at all, and she was married to him and then got divorced from him. In that case, and she wants to come back, she wants to then marry the original adulterer. If she does, lo yotzi, we don't require her to divorce. The idea is that because there was a different husband in between, so when she goes to that husband, that quells any of the rumors that she got divorced because she was with this other guy, this adulterer. So no, she didn't go to the adulterer. She went to some other guy, so it's totally fine. And afterwards, she goes to the adulterer. So already those rumors die down, so it's not as bad, and she can remain married. That's the braita. Now we say, Hechidami, what case is talking about? Is it that there are witnesses to the original adultery? If there are witnesses, then it doesn't help that there's a man in between that will help the rumors die down. There are witnesses, so it's not just rumors, it's substantiated, proven fact. And so it shouldn't make any difference. Rather, it must be talking about a case where there are no witnesses. And the only reason why we say lo yotzi, that he doesn't have to divorce her, is because there was this man in between. But if there was no man in between, and there was a rumor, and then she got divorced from her rumor without witnesses, and she got divorced from her first husband, and then she goes and marries the adulterer, then then we would force them to get divorced, which is the peshat of the Mishnah, and this is against Rav. And so we have from this braita we can support the pshat of the Mishnah, and not Rav that says we only make her get divorced if there are witnesses. No, even when there's not witnesses. Amar lecha Rav. Rav says, oh, I can explain this braita. According to my opinion, the truth is that even if there was not someone in between, still we would force her to be removed from the adulterer. In fact, there is no difference between a case where a second man comes in between the first marriage and the marriage with the adulterer, and stops the rumor, or there is no man in between, the law will be the same. If there are witnesses in both cases, we would force the adulterer and the woman to divorce. And if there are no edim, then we do not force them to get divorced. So what's the point of this baraita? How is a case when there's a man in between different? The point is that even if there is a man in between who stops the rumor because she goes in from her original marriage and marries some other guy and says, oh, I guess, she just wanted a divorce from the first guy because she didn't like him. And that's why she went there. And nevertheless, if she goes and divorces that second one and then marries the adulterer, we do not allow that right? Even though there was someone in between, we still don't allow lecha techila. So this baraita was actually coming to add a stringency that this case is not treated any more leniently than the case where there's no man in between. Okay, and now a further objection to Rav based on another baraita. When do we say when does this Mishnah apply? That we forced her to divorce when she was suspected of adultery, only if she did not have children from the first marriage. Aval yesh la banim, if she does have children from the first marriage, and then the court forces her to divorce get divorced from her second marriage with the adulterer, then everybody will say, oh, you see, they forced her to divorce the adulterer because it was true that she committed adultery, and therefore those children, who knows who the father is, they may be mamzerim, and so then you cause a problem to those children. So therefore, if she has children from the first marriage, we allow her to remain with the second husband, with the adulterer, so that it will not cause any rumors, and people will say, oh, the children are all from the first marriage, and she divorced and then married some other guy. And so that is the case if there are no, so when do we say that she has to leave? When there's no children, however, from the first marriage, then there's no problem. We should fine her and not allow her to be with the adulterer, and there's no effect on further children. And so our question on that is, if Rav, you say that the Mishnah is talking about a case where the actual edim came, then there's nothing to talk about rumor or not rumor and what people will say, because it's just simply prohibited. There are witnesses that she committed adultery, and therefore, even if there are many children, we have to make sure she gets divorced. And so this implies that it makes no difference. So we answer, Rav mokela lematitin b'yesh lahabanim b'yesh la'edim. Oh no, we answer, Rav could explain the Mishnah is talking about a case where she does have children, and that's why we only force her to get divorced if there are witnesses. Because even though she has children, doesn't matter. The witnesses you have to give us. But if there are no witnesses, then she will remain married to the adulterer, to the suspected adulterer, because we want to protect the children. So so it has to be yesh banim veyesh la'edim. Okay, so Rav can still fit the Mishnah, even though it's a bit by force, into his reading. But then we ask, why does Rav look, what's forcing Rav to establish that the Mishnah has to be a case where she does have children from the first husband, and there are also witnesses that saw her commit adultery, and the reason why she has to leave the second husband is because there are witnesses that she was guilty in the first place. But if there were no witnesses, then we would not, because she has children and we want to protect the children. Why do you have to say all that? Why not just say it's talking about a case when she does not have children? Even though there are no witnesses, she still has to leave her second husband, because I would agree with that law, that if there's no children to protect, then even if it's without witnesses and just suspicion, we would require her to divorce. So since he agrees with that law, why not simply say the Mishnah is talking about that case? The reason is because the Mishnah was difficult for him to read in that way, since it says they removed her. It could have just said he divorced her. Why they, meaning the Bet Din, called Otziuha, refers to the Bet Din that forced her to be divorced. Why would the Bet Din get involved? It must be because there were witnesses, and based on witnesses, the Bet Din forced her to remove her, and that's why he assumed that has to be a case of witnesses, and that resulted in his having to interpret those other baraitot as he did. Okay, now the second answer, that's going to be simpler. Or we can say that those baraitot that we brought to question Rav are actually a different opinion of Rabbi. And so you don't have to ask a question from them because that's Rabbi's opinion, and Rav doesn't have to agree with that. All right, the Mishnah would not go according to Rabbi. What is this baraita of Rabbi? The Tanya. Rochel Yosef Isha Chogedet Besinar. Amar Rabbi Ho'il Muchar Davar Tese. Baraita says that someone who is a peddler and he peddles things and goes from house to house, and if he goes from to the home when the women are home alone, and that someone sees Rochel leaving the house, and the woman is putting on her smock, putting on her clothing. This looks suspicious. And Rabbi says, since this is a suspicious-looking thing, distasteful matter, so she has to get divorced. You see, Rabbi says one has to get divorced even for just a rumor. Therefore, those baraitot follow Rabbi. Rav disagrees and says, no, you don't force her to get divorced just for a rumor, only if it's something, only if there are witnesses. Rabbi has other cases. If a husband comes home and he finds spit on the underside of the canopy bed, Meiri explains that this is a euphemism. It's not talking about spit, but rather a different bodily fluid that is distasteful. And so this doesn't look right. And therefore, she is suspected of committing adultery and have to get divorced. Min alim hafuchim tachat hamita. If they find shoes reversed under the bed, this also looks suspicious. Now, what does this mean that the shoes are reversed? Is that they're facing the wrong way or upside down? Min alim hafuchim lachzeh demanhu. If the shoes are there, so then go find the shoes, see who they fit, and ask the guy what were you doing here, and you can clarify the matter. So it's not that the shoes were there, elam mekom min alim hafuchim tachat hamita, but rather there was footsteps that one could still see that were reversed. Perhaps the person was wearing their shoes upside down or in a funny way so that they would footsteps would not be recognized. They're doing something that is suspicious. And so Amar Rabbi Ho'il Muchar Dabar Teseh, and this is distasteful, and therefore she has to be divorced. So we see that Rabbi was more stringent in this matter, and he says one would have to get divorced even for just a rumor, and therefore she would not be able to remarry, and if she remarried, she would have to get divorced from the second guy as well, even based on a rumor. Whereas this disagrees with our Mishnah, according to Rav, and Rav says is more lenient and says no, only if there are witnesses to the original adultery, then we would force her to get divorced if she goes and marries the adulterer. But if there are no witnesses, then they cannot get married lechatechila, but if they do, b'di'avad, it is okay. I'll end with another tangent, which is that the Rambam has a very important teshuvah in this matter, where there was an actual case during his time of a man who was living on a compound together with a non-Jewish maidservant, and this man's brother, they had a business fight and was suing him legally, and the brother brought these rumors up. First to the Muslim court that threw out the case, and then to the Jewish court to say, oh, this man is suspected of being with this Christian maidservant. And therefore, the court has to get involved, and the court didn't know what to do, and so they wrote a letter to Harambam and asking the community, asked them, what should we do about this case? And Rambam says, although the Mishnah here technically says that he has to send her away, and they cannot get remarried because there is a rumor that they are together, and that would be the letter of the law. Nevertheless, Rambam says, yes, that would be the best thing to do. But if the brother is unwilling to do that, then it's best that he free her, and then she'll become a full Jew, and then allow them to get married. Even though it will violate this law, that's a derabanan law, because we don't want to substantiate a rumor. Nevertheless, Rambam says, better to eat gravy than to have forbidden flesh itself. And the idea is that if we do nothing, then he will remain with this woman in sin. And so better to give him a way out, even though it will cause a smaller violation of this Mishnah, but it will overall be a benefit. And so Rambam therefore permits him to marry. That Teshuvah of the Rambam became the precedent for many poskim, especially Sephardic poskim, dealing with similar cases for generations later. And in fact, Rabbi Shlomo Kluger and Rabbi Meir Chai Uziel also rely on this, especially in modern times where we're living under a secular society, and a person who is intermarried can remain with his non-Jewish wife or non-Jewish husband, and there's no legal force, no legal power that will cause them to separate. And so since they can physically remain together, if they come and choose and say, oh, you know what, we want to convert and marry, so then it's actually not for an ulterior motive, because they can remain together no matter what. And so in these cases, we can actually allow them, and according to some, even encourage them to convert and marry rather than live together together with a non-Jew. So I wrote an article on this. If anyone's interested, I'm happy to send it. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.